Mike Harrington, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm not special. I've just got this because I wander around a bit, and I want to read some of the bits off the slides. So thank you very much for the invite to come along. It's a special thing to come to Ireland, and I love it. So as an agronomist, in terms of regenerative, or we like to call it adaptive, intelligent farming, really, it's trying to go back to perhaps systems that we had a knowledge of in the 40s and 50s before intensive agriculture comes along. So one of the difficulties we have when we change to systems is we went from a very expansive system, if you like, to a system which is incredibly narrow, driven by nitrogen and chemistry. And what we've really got to try and do with our biological processes is to actually reverse that and move back into a very expansive system again. And what I want to try and do this morning really is just to talk a little bit about the biology of soils and show you some pictures about things that do work, things that don't work, the contradictions that we see, because becoming more expansive means there's a huge amount to try and consider within the system. And it isn't as simple. We've got to relearn perhaps some of the wisdom that we had some 60, 70 years ago. So if I start off really, and if we look at the first slide, we're talking really about if you could build a phrase around what is biological farming, it's an extraordinary substance really, because functioning correctly, soil is a living entity. It's a constantly interacting, interdependent whole operating a continuous cycle of expansion, contraction, digestion, and mineralization. It's huge. It's a living city. And if all this is functioning and working, you create fertility. So there's a lot of components to fertility, but it's the output of that system functioning. So the fertility is really the natural output of soil, and it's the culmination of the processes that leads to production of humus. And humus really is the special ingredient. It has such a profound effect on how soils function and the connection between the physics and the chemistry of the soil. And of course, we can't have humus without biology, and we can't have biology without organic matter to feed it. So it becomes a really important topic, really. And the picture of the roots on the right really just shows you that we have this really good connection. So plant root exudates are drawing microbes to the plant, they're feeding off plants, producing exudates, which are sticking soil particles to the root system. And generally, we can have 10 times more nutrient exchange in that rhizosphere than we can out in the soil. So again, all this becomes this huge holistic approach. One thing leads to another. So this is really I'm trying to show you some of the pictures that we work off on farms. And this is one of the best biologically active soils that we would have. It is based on the downs, so they're high calcium, they're naturally open. It's a clay loam, so we have a loam is the best of sand, silt and clay. And because that means we have soils more naturally open, it's easier for biology and roots to function. So if we take the best of what we can see, and then we come up with perhaps what we call a compromised soil situation, you can instantly see we have two very different systems. So the good one, the one that we like talking about really, is that we have a direct link between the physics, the chemistry, and the biology, and in the middle we've got the organic matter. And what happens really, as biology breaks down and converts and rebuilds organic matter, that halo is basically the humic properties, which gives you the connection. So the organic matter is the modulator, if you like, the mediator, which connects all the different parts together. So the dilemma is, this is a very poor illustration, simply because there are a lot of components that need to be added to this. So, we could put plants, we could the air, for instance, everything. There's a lot of components to fertility, which we only need one to drop to stop the process from functioning. So this is a very big holistic process in a system that functions as a big city. So the one on the far side, the poorer looking of the soils, is that you can see that we have tight soils, we have poor root systems, and because we've got anaerobic conditions and they're tight, what it means is we don't really have biology in that system. So we're looking really at the raw physics and chemistry of that soil. And although we've got some organic matter in there, it isn't functional. Quite often we can have the same amount of organic matter in both soils, but if it's not digested and recycled and rebuilt, it doesn't become part of the big city in the system. So the physics, the chemistry, the biological, everything should connect to everything, and everything influences everything else. And that's what's really important. And going back to some of the wisdom we had 60, 70, 80 years ago, this is Dr. Pfeiffer talking in 1961 about functional soils. The basic idea is feed the soil life, and soil will feed the plant. He also had a comment about the other side. So the basic idea of intensive agriculture was feed the plant directly and use the soil as a vehicle only to carry nutrient solution. So we have two really different systems that we're trying to understand. So if we threw those two soils apart and say, this is the one that we want up here, and this is the one that's compromised down here, when we go on farm, really, what we're trying to understand is where are you, or where are your fields, from a point of view of the best part of system up here and the worst system down here. And so where is your starting point if you're looking towards becoming a regenerative farmer? And is your system moving backwards or forwards? So, we talk about soils only really being in two states. They're either regenerating, building, or they're degenerating and they're moving backwards. And what we're trying to figure out really is where you are, the pros and cons of your system, and what we can do to build a system which develops a soil moving forward. So the dilemma we have, if we take these two examples really, is that we had our first 100-ton biomass crop down in the Isle of Wight. I mean, 100 tons, it doesn't really mean anything. It's just a huge amount of organic material from the cover crops. But in addition to that, we probably had 100 tons possibly under the soil. So potentially we have almost 200 tons of organic material to digest. So the question we have with some of these big cover crops is the soil in a state to be able to digest that amount of lignin and organic material? And the answer is we have one example up on the top, which is yes, and we have one example down the bottom, which is a no, absolutely no. In fact, that bottom soil, we couldn't even digest 3 tons of straw because we haven't got the facility in that soil to be able to digest. So it's going to sit there, it's going to create mischief. The other thing about all this is the organic matter, for instance, is that if we take the living soil at the top here, and we just, as an example, say 5% organic matter, I mean, that's an 8% organic matter soil. If you take 5% organic matter in a living soil, which is functioning and producing humic acids and everything going on, potentially you could probably store out 5,000 kilos of organic nitrogen. And if that cycles and connects, you can potentially release about 100 kilos of nitrogen from that system on an annual basis. So the other side, down the bottom end, we've got 5% down there, but we have no ability to be able to digest and recycle. So what we're doing is we're creating a process, really, which has to have inputs on a regular basis because we get no link to the soil. And the dilemma with all this is trying to understand where we are within our system and how we're going to move forward. So generally, if you're going to go as an organic farmer or maybe buy a direct drill, we want to be at the top end of our soil health system. You want to wake up one morning and say, I don't need to cultivate that topsoil. I can just buy a direct drill. I can compact that soil and it will repair itself. I could plough organic matter down there and it would digest and recycle. When you go down to the bottom side of that, is that you can't direct drill down the bottom there. It's not suitable. So, and they're very delicate situations. So we would have to probably shallow lift. We'd have to work the surface. We'd have to put very small amounts of maybe compost would be the best to bring life into that soil, to be able to start restructuring, to be able to rebuild a system which is moving up the scale. And the two quotes here from fantastic cultivation specialist John Schrafer, talking about you should never change your cultivation system to one that's worse than the one you've got. And what we're finding in certain cases is that a lot of people are. They're buying a direct drill and putting it into a system that doesn't function. And we do see this in the past, because what happens generally is within 6 months of you cultivating a soil, your soils will start to become tight because the air moves back out of the system and your soils slump to a point where they naturally can function. And so when you come to drop your direct drill in, they're tight. You get less mineralization of nitrogen, less phosphorus solubilization. So we get poorer germination, poor vigor, simply because these soils aren't really suitable for direct drilling. So we can balance that to some degree. You can put a starter fertilizer down, we can put biostimulants and products to help you move to a better place. Oh dear. But it's a question of trying to understand where our limitations are and what we need to do to move forward. And tillage, is as much as necessary, as little as possible, or thoughtful movement of the soil. So, it's ploughing isn't a sin if you have a reason to do something, but if you haven't got a reason to do something, that's when we want to direct drill. And I thought it was a little bit unfair, really, because we talk about the best and probably the most compromised, but actually the real art and the difficulty is somewhere in the middle. So what I thought I might do is just to give you just a few examples from the bottom up. I don't know whether I can. From the bottom up, you can see. Sorry, gone back. You can see just a stepping point from no biology in the top surface to a small amount of crumb structure developing just here. So we've got a very delicate area of biological activity, and we've got a bit of a lump here and coming back. So this is a very, very delicate situation. We're just starting to build organic materials. What we don't want to do ever is to come along and plough this down and bring this up, because we restart the system again. So these are very delicate soils. We have to sort of feed them slowly. We need to think about maybe we might want to aerate this, put a shallow lifter in. And as time goes on, this would begin to repair and develop. So there's another one a little bit further down. Look, we've got actually this crumb structure and microaggregate structure started to move down the profile, and we've got these better root systems, and we're beginning to break up this hard pan underneath here. And quite often, sometimes you can see, well, even if you just brush off this area that's working, you can see this is the active aerobic area, and it's microbes creating soil and creating the city. So 90% of a plant that feeds is in this area. So the bigger the area we can produce, the bigger the root systems, the more connection, and the more nutrients we can come. So we have nature can take us back, so can humans. So the example here, this is in Oxfordshire. This was rented out for seed potatoes, and at the end of the season, this is what we've got. So we've got huge damage going backwards. So my argument to the farm really is £250 an acre isn't enough to rent your land out to get that back at the end of the season. And the far one is someone just starting off direct drilling. So we were talking about sometimes the soils aren't quite in a state to be able to direct drill, and they go a little bit tight. And this was drilled, and then 3 or 4 days later, we had all this rain on top, and because it couldn't move through the profile, it just sat on the surface. And so this was 3 months later. This was the wheat plant in the state that it was. So we haven't got connection. The soil system was very poor. The wheat plant was struggling. We've got no roots. We've got no connection, and it really is struggling. In a modern farming system, we can potentially bypass that. We can put, starter fertilizer. But at the end of it all, we're going to struggle to actually get this going, simply because our system is not functioning. So if I look at someone like Tim Parton's farm up in Staffordshire, who's been farming regeneratively maybe 15 years now, you can see this is after 10 days. You can see the root system, how it's developing, how the connection is there. And so we talk about microbes being the creators and managers of soil, producing amongst things humus. They create the porosity and structure in soil, and without them, soil can't function. So a dynamic soil system promotes growth and life. It's when you start to look at these things in opposites, it's absolutely very, very plain to see. I don't mean to be derogatory with the soil food, but this is, I use this simply because it shows a relatively simple soil food web. So I'm using my compromised soil, if you like, and what happens in the compromised soils, because you don't have the ability for microbes to do anything, you don't have much food source for microbes to be able to cycle. And so what you have is a very unstable, unpredictable, weak soil food web. And what they call it a single point chain reaction. So a small amount of energy comes in and it creates a link through the system. Sometimes there isn't enough there to create a link. So you might be able to digest organic materials, but you don't have the ability to restructure them into humic products. So we have this system really which is unable to function. And that's why we need small amounts of artificial nutrients in on a regular basis. If we look at the better soils, for instance, you begin to see that we have a completely different system here. And we call this the chaos theory, because you can't actually see what's going on at any particular time. It's a multiple point chain reaction. And because this is going on all the time, you have resilience and releasing nutrition for the season. It has a lot of energy within that. And for those people who are livestock farmers with grass and muck on an annual basis, what you're doing is that you're building and building and building. And when you come to put nitrogen on, it goes into the system and the system feeds the plant. In our old system, the one that wasn't functioning, it is directly the nitrogen that makes the plant grow. So in this system, we've got resilience, diversity, and stability. And it's difficult to measure these things, but if you look at the two pictures I showed you, you can see immediately that you have something good and you have something that's compromised. I can't say that things are bad soils anymore. They're just soils in a different state, and they don't suit the system that we're growing crops in. And this was some examples, really, that this is a farm in Marlborough. This is a really, really tight, difficult soil. They have cultivated it, really bad blackgrass, and they have a real struggle managing. But you can see, do we have any crumb structure in here at all? We do have some roots. But we have, in England, we have a lot of schemes coming along. So one of the schemes that this farm was able to do is to put a field next door into something called an AB15. So the government pay to put a 2 to 5 year grass and legume lay in. And what that allows you to do really is to allow nature to recover a little bit slower than we would in terms of farming. So this is the field next door. After 2 years of AB15, and you can see it's exactly the same soil type, but you can begin to see what the effect of the organic matter and the plants have had on the structure and create beginning to create this minor crumb structure that we've got here. It's a really big change. And sometimes in our farming systems that we don't have enough time for nature to be able to repair. And this was a red clover root going down through here. So the dilemma we had with this farm was that our fungal bacterial ratio was 0.4 to 1. So if you're producing an awful lot of organic material and lignin and you don't have the ability to digest it, what you do over 2 years is you build organic matter and lignin. So at the end of the 2 years, we take this out, and what happens then is that you've got a massive amount of lignin that the soil has to try and degrade. And what happens in this particular case is that it sucks all the nitrogen out the soil, and we have a wheat crop which is deficient in nitrogen for the season. So moving forward, one of the things is we do want to try and bring this fungal bacterial ratio up to maybe 1.5 to 1. So again, going back to Tim Parton, he grows 3 to 5 years of grass as for hay. His fungal bacterial ratio is 1.6 to 1, which means that his soil is able to digest lignin and root as the year develops. So when we get to our end of our 3 or 5 years, we can direct drill our wheat in and everything is cycling. So the dilemma in some cases is that we haven't got the biological system to be able to digest and recycle this. So we've overloaded the soil system. And it's going back, if you like, with our 100-ton crop. Is our soil able to function and digest and recycle the things that we're putting into it? So this was a study that was done by AHDB in England, and it was basically a farm bench between 2018 and 2021, and they talked about all the wheat compared to yield and nitrogen applied. And what we have here, their assumptions really was a weak association between the amount of inorganic N applied and yield. And if I put a line through this 10 tonne a hectare, you notice that we've got some people up here doing 10 tonnes with 270 kilos of nitrogen, and we've got a guy down the bottom here, little more than 60 kilos of nitrogen getting 10 tonne a hectare. So you sort of begin to ask, well, what is the difference? Because in actual fact, to get 10 tonne a hectare, you still need the same amount of nitrogen. So the dilemma really is that guy down there is getting more contribution from his soil, so one assumes he's got fertility and he's cycling. And this guy up here is probably a system where he's getting no contribution from the soil. And so we're putting excess nitrogen on to get the same yield. You begin to bring these soil systems back in and realize that actually we've always had the ability to bypass a poor system. What we haven't realized is over 60, 70 years is the system gets worse and worse and worse. And then we have a real breakdown. So we always talk to people about really try and have a small area where you don't use nitrogen. Because what we want to try and do is to understand what nature is giving you. And that way you can begin to work out the effect of nitrogen you're applying compared to your ability to move your soils forward. And we also like a small area with 50% more nitrogen because we like to see what happens actually in terms of that efficiency curve moving up. Because every farm is different. We've come from a system of chemicals where everybody treats every farm the same with the same product. And what we're now beginning to see is that every farm is now an individual unit, and we're talking about individual situations. Understanding and holistic understanding of the farm is now a big project to discuss, not just about products. It's just trying to figure out where our limitations are within the system. And this is just, again, taking my compromised soil. In England, we've got an index system which we can measure, and I can tell you that phosphorus levels here are high, potassium is very good, and magnesium is high. So we have lots of nutrients in this soil. When we do a tissue analysis on the plant, we're chronically deficient in phosphorus, potassium, magnesium. So it's not that we don't have nutrients in the soil, it's just we can't access them. But if you look at the soil, we have no aerobic biology, we have no root system, we have no air. The system can't function. And so we're drawn into an intensive farming system to be able to survive. We have systems in England with precision farming systems where we would measure on a hectare basis each one of these soil tests, and then we would apply nutrients according to that hectare. So some of them are $7.50 an acre on an annual basis to do this. So if you'd run with their system, we wouldn't be applying any nutrients, but we're chronically deficient. So we don't have enough information to be able to manage this system, and we have to think slightly differently. So this is just really to show you that I think we all know that if you don't have anything on your soil, we lose nitrogen. The picture over on the far side there is a farmer up in York, Angus Gowthorpe, and it's really just to show you that his neighbour's ditch is running down here, all the diffuse pollution, and this is Angus's clear water coming out into the ditch. So when you build and work with soils which are functioning, you create humic materials and gums and gels which stick the soil together, which actually maintains particles within the system. And if you have the chance to go out on the back there and look at the slake test, you've got exactly that. You've got someone's soil which actually the water's come through nice and clear, and the soil next door you've got diffuse pollution with particles dropping out as well. So the biology of a soil situation actually retains nutrients in the system and maintains your soil in a fit state to move forward. And this was just to show you again, I mean, this is well documented now that, we've got areas with nothing losing up to 80 kilos of nitrogen, and this study here, we've managed to retain nearly all of it, just losing 0.6 of a kilo. This is about cover crops. And some of the cover crops we've been able to grow are huge. I mean, when you think that this cover crop here has only been in 10 weeks, we've got 350 kilos of nitrogen, 260 kilos of potassium in this cover crop, which is drawn from the soil system and pulled back up into the surface. And to me, it's all about connection and collection. So, if you can get deep root systems going down, you can draw up nutrients that we wouldn't get with other cover crops. Other crops that we're growing. And we've got a total biomass here of 56 tonnes above ground, and we've got massive amounts of nutrition. We'd never utilise all that nitrogen. We'd be lucky to probably utilise maybe 30 or 40%. But if you've got an active system with humus, you will cycle and retain. And if you don't have an active system, you lose. And that is a dilemma. So this was actually a wheat crop that was foraged, and so this was a King Super 10. It was a mix of 10 different species that put in the 1st of July, and within 10 weeks we had this. And it was just to show you that you have a huge influence once that cover crop moves into its extension phase. You have big, deep root systems, a lot of root exudates being able to connect with the soil and microbes, and you can see all these white fine root systems here. Next stage on was he drilled direct into it. These are high pH chalk soils, so 8.2, 8.5. So we always have a problem with calcium tying up copper, manganese, zinc. We're always low in boron, huge deficiencies in potassium and magnesium. So what we've done is we've had a huge upturn in the way that we can access nutrients and cycle nutrients. And this was the following wheat crop. And I only put it really here. So we got 9.2 tonnes of wheat, 80 kilos of applied nitrogen, 1 herbicide, no fungicides at all. But the point of this is that we haven't applied any nutrition, but the only element we're short of is boron. So our nitrogen is above range. We've got potassium for the first time ever in a range that the plants can utilise. And on our high pH soils, we can pour muriate of potash and we can pour foliar potassium on, but we never get levels up to normal. Again, in Tim Parton's case, what he's found actually is that we've gone from cover crops on an annual basis, we've gone from an index of 1 up to 5. So we're drawing from depth and we're redistributing nutrients which we'd lost in terms of the roots of wheat crops. So the question is, well, how big can a root system be? And these are prairie systems. The old prairie systems were building up was 18% organic matter. When they first took them out to trial nitrogen, it was 9 years before they actually got a response from nitrogen. So you could argue that 18% would release around about 350 kilos of nitrogen if it can cycle. But the other thing is it not just about organic matter up here, we have organic matter building down through vertically as well. And we have old systems in England, old parkland systems, that even 1.5 meters down, we can be 8% organic matter. So, you know, we work on this very thin layer, but as the system builds, you will start to build vertically as well. So in nature, we talk about carbon driving all systems, not nitrogen. And intensive farming, it's nitrogen that drives the system, and that's what's driving carbon out. There's just another example. This is in Kent, in the east of England. A farmer here who's got 350 kilos of potassium. This is drilled after wheat. So in a 9-week period of this cover crop, we extracted 350 kilos of potassium from the soil and drew it up to the surface. And it's one of the only ways we've been able to begin recycling. And when we think about all these things, is that it's all cycles. We're trying to retain, we're trying to capture, we're trying to scavenge, we're trying to retain, and we're trying to sort of build this into this big holistic system. And again, we can see the pictures of the active root systems connecting with soils. So this was one fairly recently in Kent, and the reason I sort of put this up really was just to show that he sprayed this off with glyphosate 2 weeks before he drilled. And sometimes what worries me a little bit is that if you take all the green material and the active enzymes and nutrients, and we're left with a skeleton of a crop, we're going back to a situation where the soil is going to have to spend a lot of energy to be able to digest and recycle. And we're going to have a little think about whether actually this is a limitation. But I just wanted to show, this was after 10 days, we put a brood set of microorganisms with some food sources down into the soil. And you can see we've got some really nice root structures coming down, bigger roots than we have top growth. So sometimes we see in high nitrogen soils is we have more top growth than we have roots. So we want the roots to develop at the best possible amount. And you can't get all the roots in when you pull them up, but down the bottom here, we've got these little root systems coming right down 12, 15 inches. So this is exactly what we're trying to do is with these systems, is to create the habitat, if you like, for roots to be able to connect as best we can. So in the 1927 American Journal, somebody measured a rye root. So they were talking about 387 miles long, but if you took the fine feeder roots, we were talking about 6,600 miles of root. And you could begin to see the root system is hugely important for connecting, not only taking up, but also feeding. You know, when we talk about 30% of the energy the plant captures is pushed out of its root system. It becomes a really important connection of how things work. And this was just to show you that we can get some real benefits by putting microbes into the root system against untreated. But I only really put this up because a response from any product shows that we have a deficiency somewhere in the system. And so products are great, but what we don't really want to do is to become stuck on them like we have in our intensive system. So let's use products, but the system is the driver, the product supports the system. If we don't work from ground up, and we start working from product down, what happens is that you just convert your money from fungicides onto more and more products. And we're going to have a deluge of biostimulant products coming onto the market. So it's trying to understand the pros and cons of your system and use things wisely to help you move to a better place. And again, the dilemma for cover crops, for instance, is actually, can we get them in early enough to actually do anything? And in poor systems, it's always compromised. And so we were beginning to try and figure out, well, could we, how should we take a year off? Would that be the best thing to do to change our soil system, invest in a year to change, to move you to a better place? Or would it be better to struggle for 10 years and carry on with the herbicides and not actually achieve anything? You know, and these are dilemmas whether you own your farm, you can afford to take a year off, or you can do anything. It's a real dilemma. So this one here it's actually short of nitrogen. It hasn't connected, and we've got black grass as being part of the system. It's not really functioning the way that we want it to do. And we don't always have to have these really big cover crops. So this is a scheme. It's called a GS4, and it's basically a grass clover mix. The government pay you £350 a hectare. You can graze it. You have to leave it ungrazed for 5 weeks during the season. But the point here is that these are modest 124 kilos, 120 kilos of potassium, but this is a second year. So we would have had a build-up last year of something in this range as well. So we can do things slowly. We can do things with lays and cover crops, and grass becomes part of this big system. And I just literally put this simply to show you that, back in 1950, Newman Turner came up with herbal lays and talked about this as being the basis of soil fertility and animal health. So this is a field options trial, Harper Adams. And what they've done is at the far end, we've got a straight Italian ryegrass, then we've got an Italian ryegrass mix, then we've got an Italian ryegrass mix with legumes, and then we've got an Italian ryegrass mix with legumes plus red clover. So both the legumes and red clover had no nitrogen, but they've out-yielded the straight grass with 250 kilos of nitrogen. We knew all this in 1955, and you're going to wonder, why on earth did we go into a system which has been using huge levels of nitrogen? Not only is this a huge step forward into working with soils, is because you've got these deep rooting systems. So all of a sudden, we've got all these herbs connecting in a different way, which is going to bring more nutrients from the soil at depth to the animal health. So we know that chicory is a sodium accumulator, selenium and plantain is an accumulator as well. Yarrow is a copper accumulator. So all of these things is bringing diversity and connecting with soils in a different way to bring different nutrients. We also look at some cases, some of the really big farms, for instance, they don't want to start drilling late. And so we're drilling farm fields early. What we're expecting to talk about is that how do we manage these forward crops, and could we potentially use grazing as a management tool to take forward crops off in the autumn? And this is just an example of someone bringing 1,100 ewes to Wales, just putting them on a field for 2 days. And it just shows that we can work really well without any damage. So we don't want to take any more than 50% off, and we don't want to create any surface capping. And you can just see a system here which is actually, it's worked really well. The dilemma we have is that we have more situations where we cause damage, which means we reduce yield. So this is a very delicate system. And Gabe Brown's was talking about the fact that 50% grazing, we get a bit of root stockage, but you only got to go to 80%, and your whole system stops. So in actual fact, you basically stop rooting for almost a month. So it's a very delicate procedure, really. But it shows it can be done, and you can bring this diversity in. Animals bring something extra into the system that we can't have otherwise. Again, this is Wild Farmed. It's a system in England run by Andy Cato. They're looking at developing a complete circle, so it's from farm to plate. They're moving for distributors, cooks, whatever, to come down and link in with the whole system of this holistic approach. So all of a sudden they're buying into a regenerative system, and they're being paid a small, actually premium. So in this system, these are strip drilled trials, and what we're able to do is to overlay crops onto crops. So this is a heritage wheat. Then we've got linseed, crimson clover, and radish in between, and this is actually been grazed, and then it's taken onto yield. The principle is diversity, building diversity, and it's quite an incredible system. And they've got inter-row mowers, which they're moving in and out to manage these systems. How we manage and take out cover crops? Well, there's all sorts of innovative approaches. And, we're always on the time trying to reduce the inputs of glyphosate. But some of the wild farm systems now, because they're not allowed to use any chemicals, are starting to go back to the devil's tool they used to call rotavator. I put this is Lady Eve Balfour, and I put her plough system in because if you've got a good system and your inputs of carbon is more than your output, this isn't necessarily a backward step. The dilemma is if you don't have anything, it's a backward step. So it becomes part of the tools of trying to understand what you're trying to do and how you're doing it. But if you can't use any chemicals, you haven't got a lot of options really, and you are going back into cultivated systems. And of course, we've got inter-row hoes coming along as well. So all these sort of innovations that people are beginning to look at simply because they're looking at different markets, not necessarily organic, but different markets that would pay a premium. And this is some of the examples of wild farms, and this is their inter-row mower. So we're looking. The dilemma sometimes is that your inter-row crop can become too dominant. So all of a sudden, the crop you're growing becomes the weaker of the two. And it's how you manage this. So if we could mow this in April, you release 60 kilos of nitrogen. So the potential, could we overlay crops onto crops? So could we put an inter-row clover into oilseed rape, take the rape off, then drill your wheat crop in between the clover rows. So you starting to overlay these crops and you link crops together. So this is their polycrop, which is beans and wheat together. They harvest them together, then they split them and they'll sell them separately. So in England, we've got this sustainable farming incentive, which is just coming in this last month or two, and it's to replace BPS. This is one of my farms in Kent. We've got a blend of wheat. We've got an understory of clover. So in this one here, we've got a companion crop that we're going to get paid £55 a hectare. We haven't used insecticides for 12 years, so that's £45 a hectare. So we're getting a payment of £100 a hectare to move towards a regenerative package. The dilemma in Kent is that we've got 2 hot summers. We're growing 40% of our whole farm system is actually going into spring crops because we want to grow cover crops. But the last 2 years, the spring crops have been horrendous. And so the argument is, can we grow spring crops in hot climate? And the issue is that we're not making any money. So what we can do under this scheme is that we can put an overwintered cover, £129 a hectare, and potentially we'll come in the summer for an MU through each of the legume fallow at £590 a hectare. So we can take a year off, build 2 big cover crops, and then come back into a wheat with lower inputs. And this system, if you like, is designed for people to use for the benefit of regenerative farming. And it's really quite exciting. There's all sorts of things that coming along. There'll be payments for reduced soil movement, payments to help you research your soil, to help measure it move forward. And it's a really positive move. And I think actually this farm in Kent, he's dropped 40% of his spring crops, and 40% of that land will go into 2 building crops. The more organic matter we can grow, the bigger the system can become. And when we go back, just to show you that the difficulties that we have, is that we get to a situation where we can't do anything actually to improve this immediately. The direct drill, the cover crop, there's nothing. We have to start from the beginning in very gentle management to move this forward. It's a very difficult situation. These were one of the most fertile fields in the country 80 years ago, and this is what we've created. Our modern farming systems, one on the far side is rat's tail fescue. This is Italian ryegrass in all-seed rape. And my argument is that our modern systems have created these problems. They've not controlled them. Resistant ryegrass is the worst possible situation we can have. And this is, again, it's a field in Kent, and that's a wheat crop. And the dilemma here is that the ryegrass might be a great carbon builder, but this system's out of control. And what we tend to see with weeds sometimes is that they begin to develop their own system to promote themselves, and it's just out of control. This farmer had a zern, which is a 24-metre weed surfer. 3 days, they got 92 tons of seed off that farm. It's a real dilemma. If we could take that and bring them over here, you'd manage it because you've got cattle, you can graze, you can silage, but over in Kent, there's very little cattle. We've got to change the system because this is a real deal breaker. Italian ryegrass can germinate every day of the year. Within 6 weeks, it can seed. One plant produces 1,000 seeds. We've got a system which is now completely out of control.
Mike, I might ask you to make a difficult decision. Will we get the last of the slides and we maybe forget the questions, or will we go to the questions? It's up to yourself.
I don't know.
Fantastic talk. What do you think?
What do you fancy? I can finish. So a couple of minutes, I'll just run through. So how do we get back in control? This is another suggestion, really, is that, we can, if we forage the crop, we're getting back in control. We've still got to think about why the things have gone wrong. We can't ignore the fact we've got ourselves back in control for this season, but it's our rotation that's wrong. It's our farming system, and so this is a standard beginning to change. We've got situations where people have been drilling for 10 years, direct drilling, and you can see here it isn't necessarily a solution. And you can see here we've got a wormhole, and the roots are going through the wormhole. So I did put this little video in just to show you. So this looks a tight soil. So I'll have a chat because it'll take time. But the problem, unfortunately, here is it isn't compacted. So they would grow a modest cover crop every 4 years. It is not enough in terms of carbon and energies to change a soil system. And what we need, you can see it breaks up in your hand. This isn't compacted soil, but roots can't penetrate. We've got no energy in here. And this farmer said to me the other day, I can't grow big cover crops because it just mucks my system up. Well, because the system can't cope with this. And that's the dilemma. It is one man on 1,500 acres has found a way that this system can work, but it's not moving his soils forward. We've reached the equilibrium where the energy in the soil is balanced by life and what he can get out of it. And sometimes it's difficult to try and understand how you move forward without basically not doing anything. If you don't do anything, you can't achieve anything, and that's the problem. And I just put this in simply because some farmers have always practiced fertility building and never joined the system. So this is a guy, basically, that's always had livestock, always had muck. He only puts 50 kilos of nitrogen on, and look at the size of those flag leaves. So a natural process that regenerates over a chemical process that degenerates. If you work with and you have the ability to feed on a regular basis, you will start to move things forward. And this is the last one. So the dilemma of mindset change is how we get the farmer to become the decision maker rather than the agronomist, creating an integrated, holistic approach to farming. We need to management from the roots up, not product down. How do we become carbon builders? Every year, leading to nitrogen capture, nutrient scavenging, recycling, and ultimately a reduction in purchased fertilizers. And for most, the cover crops or potentially herbal lays will manage P&K. So to take chemicals out of farming, we need to build a new process, a new set of rules or dynamics. And what others do is not necessarily suitable for you. We've got to find your route. The dilemma we have sometimes is the possibility of being drawn back into a semi-intensive system, creating a hybrid. And that last example is exactly that, is that you're not really one or the other. Your system is a halfway house. And that's not to say it's wrong or right. It's down to you to choose. But to be true to your situation is that we want to build the best of the situation that you have. And soil fertility really is about renewal and preservation. And if it's really 2 words, those are the most important things that we need to try and understand. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
That's absolutely fantastic stuff, Mike. I could listen to that for hours and hours. Sean, do we have time for a question? We move it along and maybe we get people. It's their own fault. It's all Sean's fault. Does anybody have a question there for Mike? I have 100 questions for him if nobody has one. There's one there at the back we could go to.
The clickers.
It's fantastic to see down there at the very end, Sean, the bottom left, that there are farmers you have with excess levels of potassium who don't apply any potassium, which really highlights it for me. They're selling their straw to try and get control of that.
Yeah, I will say with Tim Parton, but he's also he's not applied any potassium to his hay fields for 5 years. And what he has found is that actually his potassium levels have dipped down back to where they were an index of 1. So, but I said to him, well, that's like, it's obvious, isn't it, in a way? If you've taken 3 cuts off a year and 5 years later, you're taking a lot of potassium out of your system, but your root systems are limited to a particular level. We were talking the other day, well, is your system not able to replenish what you've taken out quick enough? Or do we need to put something in? Or should we, after the grass, put a cover crop in to get deep roots to draw nutrients back up? It is these cycles. It's trying to understand what you have, how you can collect, how you retain, how you take off, how you build. And it's a different process to thinking than just doing an index test.
I didn't mean to ask a question there. Carry on.
Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation. Really sensible and very useful. I suppose the elephant in the room is glyphosate, and how do we minimize or eliminate that in regenerative systems? And in an organic system, we don't have the ability to use glyphosate, so we're largely based on a sort of a plough-based system for weed control. And I suppose inevitably what happens when glyphosate is banned.
So it's phosphate availability, I think, was that glyphosate. It's a real dilemma. So Tim Parton and Wild Farmed are doing some studies with Rothamsted and Reading University at the moment, because Tim maintains that glyphosate in an active soil, there is no residues after it if you use it modestly. We don't want to rely on systems, and sometimes what I like about the Wild Farm system is it pushes you into thinking about other alternatives. The dilemma is, are the other alternatives necessary in terms of cultivation and ploughing? Is that worse or is that better? I think the dilemma is how you build your system and what you have and what you lose when you intervene with something, and that is a dilemma. Is if you're reducing more than you're gaining, your system is going to fail, and that's one of the reasons I actually put Lady Balfour's picture up, is that the system in the 40s and 50s was based on cultivations. It had to be. We didn't have chemicals, but also fertility building had to be important because that was the only way that it could grow nitrogen to grow a crop. So it's a balance of what goes in and what comes out, and that is a real dilemma, and you have to do that as an individual, and your system, what we can achieve.
That's a great answer. You didn't come here for blanket black and white discussions. You came here for nuance and nitty-gritty and long discussions that are complicated, and that's exactly where we are. Please give Mike a round of applause.
Thank you.